The population in the Japanese countryside is rapidly diminishing. If you take, for example, a town in northern Ibaraki known as Daigo-machi, about 50 years ago, the population of that town was at 50,000 people. Nowadays, were you to look, it's down to 17,000, a significant drop-off. And this is not an isolated case. If you look at many towns in the Japanese countryside, you'll find that anywhere from a third of the population is gone to a half to sometimes even more significant numbers. Now, this extends to impact so many parts of daily life, social security, and one of those is the housing market. I spend once a week with my Japanese teacher and we talk about a variety of different topics, one of which is the value of her home. And in the last decade, it has dropped significantly as well. And where once she was relying on that home as a kind of security financially for herself, that once the family had moved out, they could sell it, move to somewhere smaller, but then have savings, it's no longer the case that she can rely on that, and it's a big, big concern. Another element in the Japanese countryside that's seeing an impact is artisan culture, whether it's making swords, whether it's making soba handmade, whether it's making pottery. Artisan culture is an amazing thing, and it exports to all around the world, and it's something amazing to visit when you're here in Japan. But because of the rapidly dropping population, many of these places that were supported before by their local communities that would come around have so dropped off that they can no longer keep their doors open, and we're going to see in not too long a time a sort of priceless piece of Japanese culture that could potentially disappear.
I live in Daigo-machi, the town that Dave mentioned earlier, and I work at a junior high school and an elementary school. And in my elementary school, there is a total of 14 students. There are no students in the first grade, no students in the second grade, 1 student in the third grade, and 13 students across the other 3. And it's quite an amazing thing to see because the school itself isn't very small. It was built to be able to hold around 400, 500 students, which it did about 45, 50 years ago. But due to this massive decrease in the overall population of the town itself, the school is now left with only 14 students. And to make matters worse, as of March 2019, in 6 weeks' time, this school will be shutting down. This decrease in population of rural Japan isn't something that's new. It's been happening for many decades now, and one of the major contributing factors is cities. Cities provide safety, security, and above all else, opportunities. Economic opportunities, social opportunities, and educational opportunities. So what you find is that a portion of the working population within a rural town or a rural area tend to leave to the cities in search of these opportunities. But what happens is they take with them a portion of that town's economy. So that town is now unable to reinvest back in itself. They're unable to create more opportunities, unable to invest in the infrastructure, which then leads to even more people leaving that town. So as you can see, this essentially creates a self-perpetuating negative downward spiral of a few people leaving, leading to a lot of people leaving that area. And that's essentially what's been happening in these rural parts. And what you find is that right now, in many of these rural areas, there's a large population of the very young and a very large population of the elderly, but a very small population, or a very small working population, that's actually able to support this.
The reduced cost of real estate in the Japanese countryside is something that cuts both ways. And that is to say that yes, of course, for my Japanese teacher, somebody in that particular time of their life where they're looking to maybe downsize and create savings, it's not good for them. But at the other end of the spectrum, say for example, I have a friend in the very small town that I live in who recently has 2 very young children. He would like a home to raise them in. And the lower cost of real estate here means that it's a great opportunity for him to be able to purchase affordably and raise his children in a very positive environment. The cost of the mortgage is lower. The ability that you have to design the home and have something completely brand new is something that's very, very unique to this area.
The experiences that you have living and working in the countryside of Japan are truly unique to these parts of Japan. As I mentioned, I work in a school with 14 students, which on the surface may seem like a negative thing, but in reality is actually quite amazing. I'm able to give each student a level of attention that I wouldn't be able to give them at a much bigger school. And something that's quite interesting is that as an English teacher in rural Japan, your role goes way beyond that. You end up taking on the role of a mentor or a role model. And more than teaching these kids a second language, you'll actually influence who they become as mature adults.
Another thing to consider in the Japanese countryside is the cost of living beyond real estate prices. This can do with the rent that you're going to pay. This can do with the salary that you're going to receive, and both of these are very positive. So, for example, I live in a place that's about 50 square meters, costs about 500 US a month, and it's more than double what you would find anywhere, even in the outskirts of Tokyo. It is huge by comparison, and the building is absolutely brand new. So what is less desirable to live will be much cheaper to live in as well. Now, because it's a less desirable place to live, you also have that element of salary that I mentioned, where to entice people to come and live in the countryside, on average, you're going to receive far, far more in the way of a wage. So if you put those two together, you'll find that the low cost of living for your rent and the increase in the wage that you're receiving means a very, very high standard of living.
Language. If you're coming to Japan, chances are you'll want to learn the Japanese language, and there is no better place to learn Japanese than in rural Japan, simply by virtue of the fact that there is no one out here that speaks English. So you can't have anything to fall back on. You have to use Japanese in order to communicate and make friends in these parts.
Hopefully we've given you a lot of information to consider in the course of this video today. And yes, it is on a difficult topic. It's the crisis of population in the Japanese countryside, and with that comes an element of tragedy. But where there is tragedy, there's often an opportunity to do something meaningful and positive. And if we could convey any one singular message from this video, it would be that whether you were to come to Japan for a vacation, whether it was that you'd like to live here, that don't neglect the Japanese countryside. Kind of paradoxically, there's so little out here, but then that means that there's actually so much. And whether it's that you want to take home with you some significant piece of Japanese culture, whether it is that you've been always searching for a place where you might be able to raise a family, but how could you do so affordably, you can find that here as a result of something that at first glance might seem so negative. So I will put Dan's information down below. I hope you check out his channel. Thank you for watching today, and that's all for now.